Hey everybody, this is John for MTGO coming at you with another quick deck overview for the modern format, this time with Calibrated Blast, otherwise known as the most RNGesus deck in the format. If you like these fun, informative deck reviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. So, in the vein of a lot of decks that have gotten banned, whether it be Tybalt's Trickery combo, whether it be the various Tybalt's Trickery or Cascade into Valky, flip over to Tybalt, all these various different decks like Neo Brand, etc. Probably the most random deck in the format, or the most RNGesus deck left in the format due to the bannings, is Calibrated Blast. Now, Calibrated Blast is a specifically built combo deck that is built around mulliganing to either the card Calibrated Blast or Throes of Chaos, which allow you to cascade into Calibrated Blast. Basically, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a non-land card, put the revealed cards on your bottom of your library, yada yada yada. When you reveal a non-land card, Calibrated Blast deals damage equal to this card's mana value to any target. So effectively, you are Tybalt's Trickery with a little bit of more control over what you're doing. While you don't cast a game-ending spell, you do often dome your opponent for 12 or 15 damage. In a format like Modern, where you have fetch lands, shock lands, eidolons, all these other fun, exciting toys, and people don't often care about their life total, often this is a one-shot kill. Sometimes you have to finish them off with your lands, but we'll get to that in a minute. Beyond that, you are trying to run as many castable big bombs as you can. To that end, you're running Scion of Draco in your 4 or 5 color fetch land, shock land, tri-land mana base, which effectively turns into a castable 4/4 flyer, and Shadow of Immortality, which as your opponent's dealing you damage becomes a more and more castable creature. It's just a 7/7. It's basically a fixed death shadow with a huge mana cost that serves quite nicely in what you're doing. Ideally, off of your Calibrated Blast, you want to hit either a Shadow of Immortality, an Autochron Worm, or an Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, dome your opponent for 15, untap, do it again. Notably, Calibrated Blast is an instant with flashback, so oftentimes finding one copy of Calibrated Blast is enough if your opponent can't kill you by turn 5. And then, when you're playing all these huge casting spells, basically you have to rely upon a huge amount of your lands actually being kind of spells. To that end, obviously you get to play things like Boseiju and Otawaru, which are obviously huge boons to this deck. You also get to play things like Gemstone Caverns as a 4/of to speed up your deck. And then you play a bunch of shock lands, fetch lands, tri-lands, all to be able to turn on your various different things. Then you're also running things like Sekenzin, so you get to run all the utility lands, and then you try to finish your opponent off coincidentally with things like Sun-Scorched Desert and Ramunap Ruins to get that last couple of points of damage off of the one Calibrated Blast. Beyond that, you also get to run Boseiju Who Shelters All, which is a land that makes your instants and sorceries uncounterable as long as you have a life total to spare. Obviously very good against decks like counterspells, as counterspells would be one of the better things against your particular strategy. Sideboard, you get to run a lot of other utility lands, obviously Ojuta Bog for any type of graveyard nonsense, whether it be Murktide, Living End, any of that kind of stuff. Additional copies of Boseiju and Boseiju, whatever matchups they happen to get in. Nephalia Academy. You know, your opponent wants to hit you with some discard spells. You really don't want to run Leyline and make your Calibrated Blast worse. You have to play in Nephalia Academy. Basically, if you would discard a card, you have the choice to put it on top of your library instead of in your graveyard. And then Radiant Fountain, when you need to get a little bit of life buffer against decks like Burn or Merfolk, aggressive decks that are making your life total a little bit miserable. Taking a look at the other versions of the deck, suffice to say, there aren't many. It's a very tightly knit deck. But most of the deck revolves around, obviously, mulliganing Calibrated Blast or Throes of Chaos, so you really can't afford to switch up what the deck is doing terribly much. Basically, it comes down to what utility lands you want to run in your main deck, or spell lands you want to run in your deck, and then, whether you want to have certain copies of cards in your sideboard. One thing this pilot chose to do is run Karuga, which, obviously, fine. It's a little bit of a value play in the mid-game. Nothing terribly exciting, 5-drop, but it is something you can cast. Obviously, if you're casting your Scion of Dracos or Shadows of Immortality, you might hit a couple of cards off of it, not terrible. And then, for those of you that actually want an actual sideboard, you have Punishment here as a way to deal with destroy each artifact, creature, or enchantment, mana value X. This is effectively a pseudo-pernicious deed that also happens to play quite nicely because Calibrated Blast counts both sides of a split card, so you're dealing 7 damage, which isn't great, but, you know, it still pairs with one of your other 15 drops or even a 12 drop to frequently kill your opponent, and gives you a little bit of utility against your opponent. You know, if they're playing something like Hammer Time or Burn, it might be a little bit faster than you in matchup, and you can slow them down just that tiny little bit to buy yourself extra time. Obviously, this deck, you know, the strengths and weaknesses, the strengths, obviously, it's a lot of fun, which, you know, sometimes we forget that in Magic. Beyond that, it is a deck that, when it does its thing, can be very hard to beat. You know, obviously counter spells are somewhat reasonable, but when you're playing 3 or 4 copies of Besager who shelters all, not always necessarily a thing. It's essentially the Cavern of Souls for spells. And then, obviously, discard spells are a way to attack the deck. But, you know, one of the nasty things about this is Calibrated Blast has Flashback, and Theros of Chaos have Retrace, so they have to pair discard spells with Graveyard Hate. Not only is the easiest thing to do against a deck that's just threatening to kill you out of nowhere, and then it gets to board in Nephalia Academy to kind of help to blank Thoughtseize, etc. So overall, this deck is a blast to play. If you like to high roll and win some matches, this is certainly a deck for you. If you like difficult gameplay and minute decisions, this is definitely not your deck. But overall, deck you should be aware of, deck you might run into every once in a while. It does pop up in the challenges every now and again. Probably not a deck you should expect to do consistently well with, but definitely a very powerful F&M deck and something you should be aware of you might run into in the odd challenge or preliminary. So, as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for our next breakdown on Monday.